Today is March 25th, 2024. This is episode 68 of the Sports Daily College Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells, and as usual, I'm joined by Joe Meade. Tonight, Joe and I will go over a number of different things, from the coaching carousel to transfer portal entrance to yesterday's results. Obviously, we're going to get more into the Big Ten teams because that's what we know better, but we're going to get to all of it. But Joe, we're going to start with the guy who is on the thumbnail, Darian DeVries. Hot name in the coaching carousel, linked to some other jobs. He ends up going to Morgantown. Should the Mountaineers fans be excited?
I think I'd be ecstatic. I think DeVries is talked about for, I don't want to be disrespectful to West Virginia fans. They've had a decent amount of success of late. He was mentioned mostly with Michigan, Louisville, probably even mentioned to stay at Drake. You know, he's built that program up. And the best part of DeVries is he's likely going to bring his son over. And West Virginia is not a school that's going to inhibit that from happening, like a Michigan or a Vanderbilt, if he decided to take that job. So this is a huge win for the Mountaineers. I think this is probably, in terms of value and shock, this might be the most... I'd say this is the best hire of the cycle, Sean. I really mean it, because considering where West Virginia was from this offseason to Huggins to the really disappointing product they've had with a decent amount of talent. This is probably a year turnaround. I mean, to turn around like this after probably 9 months of turmoil, I think it's really good. I think they do have a lot of work to do, but DeVries is very proven. Every year he was at Drake, he won 20 or more games. So I think probably more proven consistently of the guys. Like Dusty May clearly went to a Final Four, but DeVries never lost less than 20 games. He never really disappointed. They never had crazy expectations at Drake, but made the tournament 3 times. I really like the hire, Sean, and going to be interesting to see whether they attack the portal. I know definitely a son will go there, and maybe that could spur a few more guys going there. What's your take, Sean?
Should be good for them. You know, a lot of work to do, like you said, but he's a proven winner. They have the third most wins of any team in the last since 2020 in Division One, and obviously they get to 30 wins multiple times, so they know how to play. 2 years in a row they did lose in the round of 64, but they were right there with Washington State and right there with Miami last year, who ended up going to the Final Four. So his son is a piece to build around. I don't think he can be first team All Big 12, but I do think he can definitely get on the third team at least. And you think you get another lead guy with him and then a bunch of role players, and then I don't think it's out of the question for them to make the tournament in year one. Obviously, knowing one of his players is a little bit hard to guess that, but WVU fans should be pretty happy, especially after the last year or so of just a wasted season for them. They knew they were having an interim. They knew their players were going to be ineligible until eventually they were eligible, and then at that point, the season was kind of already lost. But the next name, Joe, that we're going to talk about was the one who was favored to go to West Virginia. That's Mark Byington from James Madison. He will go to Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt, one of those jobs that kind of got the attention of some of the bigger names, despite its lack of success in academic requirements that make it tough to get players in there. But another proven winner making a step up to the Power 5.
Yeah, and a guy who's stayed in the South most of his career, colleges Charleston, Georgia Southern, James Madison, and finally he jumps to the SEC. And Sean, we touched on this a little on Sunday when we talked about Dusty going to Michigan. I have to believe Vanderbilt itself wasn't the most attractive job in the world. Clearly you're in Nashville. It's the SEC to me that's most appealing, and I could have made the same argument for Michigan. I think Mark Byington knew he could be a candidate next year for jobs, but this might be one of those where, the candidates are probably going to be even better. Like if, I don't know, let's say not even a Kentucky opened up, but like a Florida job or that caliber, probably like tier 2 of jobs opened up. This is probably a tier 3 job, but it is in a tier 1 conference. So I think that definitely plays a factor into it. Vanderbilt hasn't had much success of late, so I think he's definitely got his work cut out for him there. But I do think Vanderbilt put their best foot forward in this coaching search. Going after Dusty was probably the number 1 guy in this cycle, mid-majors at least. And wouldn't shock me if they made a few more calls. And I bet they were relentless in getting recommendations, heating advice. So I think it's a really good hire for Vanderbilt. I do think he's not as consistent as a Medved or a DeVries. However, you know, what James Madison did this year, hopefully he can ride that momentum. And I don't know how many of his players are going to be grad transfers. That's certainly going to be a big part of transferring into Vanderbilt. So I think he'll probably have to build a little through high school recruiting. So this might be a 2-3 year rebuild.
Yeah, Jerry Stackhouse, the coach there, to get him to back-to-back NITs, unable to break the seal on the big dance, and then this year the bottom kind of fell out, and the writing was on the wall. The next job, Joe, is the next two that we're going to get to. Both teams that are headed to new conferences next year. This is Kyle Smith heading from Wazoo to Stanford as they make their trek to the ACC. Washington State, by many, has been said as the worst Power 5 job with the location, virtually no NIL, and the lack of facilities. And he took them to the dance. They swept Arizona this year. Unfortunately, they took an L to Iowa State in the round of 32. But Kyle Smith makes the move to Stanford. Are you a little bit surprised at this move that some would call lateral?
I wouldn't call it a lateral move for now because Washington State, they're
homeless.
Yeah, they're still hopeless as of the recording of this on March the 25th. Now, as we know, that could change overnight. But who knows what's going to happen with the ACC, Sean? This is why I think, in a nutshell, such a recommended listen on here. Because what happens in football, just watch the 30 for 30 Requiem for the Big East. That was made 10 years ago, Sean. College football has really taken over the college basketball, the sport we love. We could go on a tirade about that plenty of other times in the offseason, but who really knows, the future? I think for the present, though, which is what we're going to judge it on, this is definitely an upgrade. Stanford, kind of like Vanderbilt, it's kind of funny. The big academic schools all opened up this year. Vandy, Stanford. We just needed probably Cal or Northwestern to open up. We would have completed the Fab Five of academic schools. But I think it's going to be another 2 to 3 year rebuild. I think unlike Michigan and West Virginia, where the brand is so strong and there has been an immediate draw and a huge fan base, that these schools are going to have to build through high school recruiting. And I think he could do that. I think Washington State, you saw the progression. One thing I don't love, Sean, is he's only made the tournament once, and he did have a few step backs. He never really had every year they were above or at 500, but they had a few years where they missed opportunities, particularly talking from 22-15 and 21-22 to 17-17. This is really his only first year as a national candidate, so I think that could be a red flag for some, but he did upgrade the program and he left it better than where he inherited it. So ultimately, he was a success there. Probably one of the more uncertain of the candidates overall. I wouldn't say I'm confident in it, but I am confident that this is not a lateral move.
Yeah, he is striking while the iron's hot. I don't know if he has another season like this in Washington State. And Pac-12 was, I would say down overall, even though Arizona was really good. They had 4 tournament teams, but one of them was a bid stealer, and the other one was a first 4 game. So they were pretty close to having 2 bids. Now that conference is dead, but if the basketball teams take the football route, which I think that they are going to at this point, and play Mountain West schools next year without being in that league, the Mountain West is probably a better conference than the Pac-12 was this year for basketball. Certainly not in football, but you can certainly see why he wanted to move on. He got them probably to the best that they could do, and he went over to Stanford. Now, Stanford has not had a winning season since 2020-2021, where they were 14-13. They were slated to make the tournament in the year that there was no tournament, which is unfortunate to them, but they have not made the tournament since Johnny Dawkins in 2013-2014. They did get to the second weekend then, but you got to go back a couple of coaches to see their 2007-2008 was their second to last tournament appearance. They did win the NIT twice under Johnny Dawkins, but a lot of room to grow for Kyle Smith at Stanford. They're in the ACC. You can get a program off the ground in the ACC, and Obviously, with the long travel and stuff, your home floor is going to be more of an advantage than it probably should be. Not that they have great fans or anything, but 5-6 hour flights from Boston College and Virginia Tech, stuff like that. So we'll see if he can get it off the ground there. They've had a couple good players over the years. They've had a couple players go to the NBA, but very few times have they put it all together in a season. Now, the last job, Joe, we've got is the first Big Ten and only Big Ten job on this board right now, and it's Danny Sprinkle. Less than 24 hours after getting destroyed by a Big Ten team, he thought, why don't I go to that conference? He will be the first Washington head coach as the Huskies go into the Big Ten next year. Just 1 year at Utah State after a couple of tournament appearances at Montana State. Now, yesterday was pretty ugly, but you still got to like this hire if you're Washington.
I love it. I kind of compare it to the Brad Underwood hire. He was also a guy who spent 1 year at Oklahoma State, got them in the tournament, then jumped right to Illinois after his really successful run at SF Austin. They were consistently in the tournament under Underwood there. Goes to Oklahoma State, gets them in the tourney, and immediately goes to Illinois. One thing I want to point out, Sean, is like style-wise, they're not exactly the same. Sprinkle and Utah State have a great offense. Underwood is more of a program builder, I'd say. One thing to note here is it's probably going to be a quicker rebuild in Washington. It is a very powerful brand.
Than any of the first three that we talked about, for sure.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's probably on par, to be truthful with you, to a Michigan. Now, clearly you have like the West Coast, and Washington's not had the recent success of a Michigan.
They've gotten some good players, though, up in Washington. They have NIL.
Yeah, they have NIL. They are the premier program in the state now because Washington State, like, who cares? Premier program in the state in the Big Ten in their own conference.
Yeah, Gonzaga might have
not
him.
Gonzaga. Right. Yes, I caught myself. But I do think he could get some transfers there. And truthfully, just like Dusty, who knows if some of his Utah State guys don't follow him there.
Yeah, a lot of the Aggies do have eligibility left, especially Ian Martinez and Great Osobor. Actually, no, Osobor is done, I think. He actually transferred around, too. I'm not entirely sure about that, but success it's there for the taking at Washington. College football playoff this year in the Pac-12. They actually lost their coach for good reasons in football and for bad reasons in basketball. They had Keon Brooks, they had Paul Mulcahy, they had Severe Wheeler. They had people who played power conference basketball at programs probably better than theirs. So, not really sure. Definitely an underachieving year. And like many of these teams across the two sports, Joe, they're going to be headed to a new conference with a new coach. And we saw it with a couple teams last year when they moved to new conferences, but we're going to see it more this year. But as the time of this recording...
And a new AD. Keep that in mind, Sean.
And a new AD. Obviously, football does run the sport, or the landscape of college sports, unfortunately, for basketball fans. But basketball's still number 2. And probably will stay that way until football breaks off on its own, which is, who knows. But at the time of this recording, 8:45 on Monday night, Louisville's still open.
Shocking.
Yeah, they're these sort of DeVries Byington type were, I would say, the second tier of Louisville candidates. Now, you had Dusty go to Michigan. There's a couple of high tier candidates up there, but any updated thoughts on the Louisville coaching search and where they might go?
At this point, the Mick Cronin pipe dream is looking worse and worse every day. I really do not know where Louisville goes. And Sean, I want to float a theory. I'm not accusing Pitino of doing this, but I wouldn't put it past anyone who's on the Pitino coaching tree, which if you look at it is as impressive as ever. You got to keep in mind, he was found not guilty by a legal committee. So in his eyes, and probably the eyes of his supporters and people on his circle, he did nothing too illegal there. So my point to you is this, Sean. Is it so far-fetched to think that that someone made a phone call to a few of these candidates telling them to not go to Louisville, whether it was the pressure of the NIL, the ACC, the rabid fan base, or the administration? Clearly it's changed since then, but do you think it's that far-fetched?
No, because Kenny Payne was not choice 1, 2, 3, or 5 last time around. And I think it was Phil Martelli today actually talked about Dusty going to Michigan, and he wasn't going to comment on the ACC versus the Big Ten and why he didn't go to Louisville. And but he actually made some points in there. He said he wasn't going to say anything, but then he kind of did, saying like, "Oh, well, the conference is very spread out now. A lot of teams, the ACC is doing well in the tournament. It's kind of always been top heavy, but the bottom is dragging it down. They have some bad programs in the ACC that never make the tournament, and with Stanford and Cal and some of these other programs that basketball has not really been a focus, that could be a poll that 5 or 6 of an 18-team ACC could make it, and I could see why Louisville would sway you away from Louisville. But certainly it's not the job that people thought it was in this instance right now. Obviously, no one can argue that they're definitely a top 10 program of all time, but they're certainly going to have to do something out of the box for it to work this time around. Because,
and Sean, what are your thoughts on them going after a guy like Shaheen Holloway, like a Northeast New Jersey guy? Are they going to have to reach way out of their wheelhouse here? I think at this stage they might have to.
Yeah, we talked about that yesterday, Joe, didn't we? And how it doesn't really fit, and would he even go? And, Pat Kelsey from Charleston, maybe, although he likes it there. I think they're going to have to get creative, maybe, assistants at some. Well, to be fair, Kenny Payne was an assistant at a high-level program, but
they can't do that again.
No, but like maybe you go to, some top assistants at Arizona or Purdue or some of these great programs to see if they'd be interested. But it certainly is not what people thought it was going to be the number one job, no matter what else opened. And it's pretty clear that Michigan, after an 8-23 year, was more highly sought after, and Dusty got a fairly modest contract, I think, for Michigan, $3.75 million a year. That's certainly middle.
They started an NIL fund for him too.
Yeah, today.
So bad about paying him less. Yep.
Today, and it's already off to a good start. That was one of Juwan's biggest complaints, was that he didn't
Lord's fault.
Yeah, but he's already doing that. But I think $3.75 million, Joe, puts him in the bottom half of Big Ten coaches.
Easily.
Certainly with the new teams, he gets bumped up, but I think Woodson's making 6, Painter 7, Izzo 9.
Izzo runs Michigan State,
yeah.
So it's not even a monetary value at that point.
Yeah, so I'm happy for Michigan that they got Dusty. Rumors are that the 3 eligible Florida Atlantic starters are headed to Michigan. Rumors, not official yet, of course, but not even in
Nothing
the transfer
with Michigan
portal.
admissions will be official. Trust me.
They're not. They are graduates though, which is big. I think they're not even in the transfer portal yet, but that is that rumor going around that Janelle Davis, Elijah Martin, and Vladislav Golden will all be Wolverines next year, which is a good start. But just gonna have to see what happens there. See these rosters fill out. We would like to get to an episode based on each team of all the relevant programs. So Joe and I will do the in a nutshell ones for the Big Ten. We're going to try and get to all the Big Ten ones, and if we could hit some other ones, and then we'd like to do that again before next season, especially when we know what the transfer portal has really shook out. But we're going to go to the transfer portal now, Joe. A couple of big names, a couple shocking ones. Today was really touted as a big day for portal entries. I think maybe that was overstepping a little bit, but there's certainly a number of good players in here. And let's start with Jamal Mashburn Jr., followed Patino from Minnesota, New Mexico. He's got one more year left of eligibility. He's going to have a lot of big programs calling his name.
Yeah, Sean, really three really good years at New Mexico. Averaged like 16, 18. He took a little step down in scoring this year to 14, but no one, even Richard Patino, couldn't undersell how valuable he was to the Lobos program. This is a strange one to me because you would figure he would just stay there and stick it out, but I don't know, Sean. He could probably go anywhere in the country and no one would really bat an eye. An experienced fifth-year point guard who could score. I think against Clemson, that if you judge him only off that game, that would not be doing him justice. He's a phenomenal player. The only theory I could see is, do you think he follows the Patino family all the way to New York? Any chance or no?
Well, there's certainly the connection there, but remember, he is the son of a Kentucky great, and John Calipari did have his radio show today saying there is a meeting tomorrow based with the Kentucky AD, so obviously if Cal's gone, then he's unlikely to go there. I don't think Cal's going to get fired at this point, but maybe they come to an agreement where he goes somewhere else or something. That's still TBD also, but This is a big one. I think every team could use him. Doesn't matter who you have. He can start on any team in the country. He's that good. We'll see if he wants to go back to the Big Ten. We'll see if he wants to go to Kentucky, Duke, Carolina. I'm sure all of them would have him. So it might just come down to the number of zeros on the end of the check. But next one, Joe. Otega Owe from Oklahoma. 1-2 punch with Javion McCullum. Obviously, the Sooners did fall off really late, missed the tournament. But Potter Moser's best player at times is headed somewhere else.
Yeah, I'd look at this more as a blow to Oklahoma more than anything else. I think they deserve to be in the tournament. This is just gut punch after gut punch at this stage. Sean, do you have any thoughts on where he would even go? Any rumblings?
He's a unique player. I don't think every coach would necessarily jump at the prospect of having to got a coach around, not around him, but with him differently. He's like a 6'5" guard, but he's a really good player. I believe he was on the all-conference team for the Big 12. Him and McCollum were pretty good for most of the year. They just kind of ran out of depth there at the end, and obviously were victims of a pretty, they're the first team out, so they would have been in. There's a world where they probably don't even get into. They don't even have to go to Dayton, and we're talking about him as a potential, Kemba Walker candidate, I think, because he can take over games. But this is a blow to Moser. Obviously, all the noise of him, potentially leaving. At this point, it appears that he's not. He kind of told Oklahoma that he was staying, so I was a little bit shocked to see him go. And he had a tremendous improvement this year. I believe he was a sophomore. But next one, Joe, this will be his second transfer. Michi Johnson, former Ohio State player, best player on South Carolina this year. Lamont Paris gets a huge contract extension, up for Coach of the Year, and his best player is going to be playing somewhere else next year.
Sean, I've heard a few rumors, Tennessee, maybe even back to Ohio State, but this one is like the Oklahoma one. It makes no sense. The coach says he's staying or gets extended. Like, extended in this case is even more of a statement, and he up and leaves. I have to imagine NIL is involved, and I'm not saying Michi is wrong to do that by any stretch of the imagination, but it goes to show you that none of your top players, even at a school like South Carolina, maybe not, it's not Kentucky, Duke, they do a pretty good job supporting them. It is in the SEC, and for a guy who already transferred, you thought he would be safe from going. Not even close.
Yeah, we'll see where he goes. Usually takes a couple days for Tipton edits to tweet out who the person has heard from yet. It's mostly just the mid-major big scorers that have been in contact by a ton of teams so far. We got 3 or 4 more that we're going to talk about here. Devontae Davis from Arkansas in the portal, with how events have unfolded down there this year, pretty not very surprising. He's an excellent player. He's got one more year left of eligibility. Great two-way player. The offense really fell off this year, but a lot of power conferences will still definitely want to give him a call.
Yeah, Sean, and kind of like Jamal Jr., he probably has his pick of wherever he wants. Any team could use someone like that. Likely it'd be as a starter, but if someone could convince him to be a 6-man, that team would be a very lethal combination. And guy grew up in Arkansas, so I don't know. I don't quite know what other connections he has. He did commit to Oklahoma State, did switch to Arkansas, but that Mike Boynton's fired. I don't think that really means anything. So we'll see. That this might be another one of these situations where it comes down to the zeros on the check.
Maybe. I mean, I think you expect him to have decent NIL with the players that they brought in the portal at Arkansas for Muss. So, maybe it's not that. He's definitely off a down year, so maybe he just needs a fresh start. The old-fashioned transfer. But I know Indiana's interested, and definitely he can make enough threes and play enough defense to get Mike Woodson's attention. So, he actually did have a list that came out of who's interested in him, and I'm trying to track it down. But it was Loyola, Butler, some Midwest type schools. So he's a really good player. I think potential, second team all conference player if he really gets in the right situation. Can probably average 12, 13 points a game. Be a good facilitator, great defender, and hope for his sake that he can turn it around because this year was pretty rough for him. But Connor Sejan, Joe, in the portal from Wisconsin, also won. That was not very surprising. A DNP in their loss to James Madison in the round of 64.
Sean, for someone who had such an electrifying first year in the conference, had multiple 20-plus point performances last season, we often highlighted him at times as one of the key to Wisconsin's success. It was probably one of the strangest scenarios I've seen in a while in the Big Ten. Uh, Greg Gard wouldn't address why he wasn't playing. Continued to not play that much. Had a few good performances here and there. But then just stayed exactly where he was. So you can totally see this coming. This one has cross-conference transfer written all over it to me. We talked before recording this that Michigan's probably one of the front runners. He grew up a Michigan fan. Clearly grew up, has some association with the state of Indiana. Do not think Indiana's quite in the position yet where they could deny someone like Connor Esigian to play on their team. And Sean, I'm going to put this out there. I think Michigan State should give him a phone call too. I think he is the prime kind of player they would need on their team next year with no Tyson Walker, no Malik Hall, and potentially no A.J. Hoggard. And if one of these guys transfers, I know Xavier Booker said he was coming back, but they need better guard play and more guards that could shoot. And Esigian could definitely fit that mold.
Yeah, Michigan State is going to turn over the squad there. Hoggard likely gone. Walker definitely gone. Akins will be back. He could enter the transfer portal too. There's some rumblings there. If you're elevating Holloman and Fears and Carr and the freshmen they have coming in into these starting spots, it'll be good to have a veteran there who's done that before. And Esigian is that. He's not, first team all-conference player, but he could probably average 11 or 12 points a game in 28 minutes. Good three-point shooter, can definitely drive if he's run off. And I don't think Greg Gard is the best judge of talent when it comes to Connor Esigian because he's a pretty good player that should have been playing at least 6th or 7th man role on that Wisconsin team, and he really wasn't, which is, we saw his minutes cut at the end of last year, and he said, I'm going to come back, I'm going to stick this out, and then it didn't look like he got a chance this year. So I do think he can probably be a starter, a fifth option in a starting lineup on a good team, and a 6th or 7th man on a really good team. So look for some big names to reach out to him, especially those who have seen him before in the Big Ten. We have got Cliff Amori and Mawot Mag in the portal from Rutgers. A little bit of a damper for the Scarlet Knights. They've got 2 top 5 recruits coming in. You'd think they could pair them with these older role players who have seen the Big Ten a couple times around. You could think, Rutgers is going to be in the top 25 preseason. These are 2 big losses for the Scarlet Knights.
I think they're 2 huge losses. I think as we've seen, as we've discussed on this pod most of the year, combination of really young talent with experienced guys like Amori and Mag. That's a perfect recipe for not only the tournament, but for the entire season as a whole, especially as you go through inevitable ups and downs. I'm really shocked these guys didn't stay with Michael. They kind of had program guys written all over them. Sure, they weren't flashy. They couldn't always score a lot. But they did a lot of the little things right. They could block shots. They're very athletic. Amori could bring down the house with a dunk, I'll tell you that much. So I don't know how much attention these guys would get as starters, truthfully, Sean, among other teams. I think, Mag especially, but even Amori, they have 6-man or big man who probably comes off the bench, plays 18 to 20 minutes written all over them for a really good team. And if they accept that role, I think they could be on a team that excels in March. But if they're looking for starting positions, I think they might not be as impressed with their options as they thought they would be. What's your take?
I think there's a certain team that wears green and white that would have done a lot of things for Cliff Amori to start at their 5 this year. And excellent defensive player, limited in what he can do offensively, but still a very good lob threat and finisher around the rim. There's a tournament team out there for him to start, I think. Mag, probably that 6th man type role that can start if somebody gets injured type, but those 2 guys had to be the lead players this year at Rutgers. They're not that. And I think they might get a bump in NIL payments, Joe, but I think you're spot on about them accepting a lesser role. whether it's at a big-name program or a team that's just trying to sneak into the tournament. But, Joe, that's our transfer portal talk. Coaching carousel talk. Oklahoma State nearing a deal with Bryce Drew. Not done yet as of the time of recording. But we're going to get into Sunday's results now. Obviously, pretty quickly here. We had a couple of blowouts, a couple of close games, but Marquette started off the day getting by a talented Colorado team. How about this one from Golden Eagles? Kolek gets the job done down the stretch.
Kolek just gets the job done, but no one else got the job done besides Tyler Kolek. I think Marquette, again, we talked about teams getting a mulligan. This was certainly it. We talked about that for Tennessee. Certainly was it. And both teams were pretty lucky to get into the Sweet 16 after collapsing in the second half. I don't know much to say besides that. You got to get lucky in tournaments sometimes. We've talked about that at length. Brad Underwood from our In a Nutshell podcast talked about that. So certainly this was it. They're not getting any more rope, though. What do you say, Sean?
I think Shaka is the only coach that was truthful about his player's injury before the tournament. Tyler Kolek is pretty healthy now. He played 40 minutes, 21 and 11. They don't win this game unless he's awesome. They shot 61% from the field and needed a couple buckets down the stretch to win. Colorado played well. They have a lot of talent. They have a couple players who will be playing in the NBA next year, but, man, didn't look like Marquette was in control of this one for much of it, but they get the job done, like you said. Next game, Joe, was a total and complete blowout. Many people's upset pick of the day, Utah State. They laid an egg. 106-67 victory for Purdue. Utah State quit on this game as soon as they got in foul trouble, and it was ugly.
Utah State quit on this game by the third media timeout. Purdue's been really good this year, so I'm not even going to... Purdue played great, okay? I haven't seen Purdue dismantle a tournament team like this ever. In the tournament, too. I mean, that's a completely separate issue, but in general.
Yep. 57 points for the Boilers in the second half, too, which was pretty crazy.
You have to wonder, Sean, and Dusty May was pretty truthful in his interview today with local Boca Raton media in his exit interview to the media. He didn't know if all the outside noise affected FAU. Like, clearly they had different kinds of expectations than Utah State, so I'm not comparing that. But maybe Danny sprinkled the coaching search, all of that. It could have gone to Utah State.
He's gone less than a day later, so clearly there was some... he probably told Washington he was taking the job before they got to the tournament, maybe in between games, because they turned it on late against TCU, but I was not impressed with them here. They were hanging around early, they were making some shots, but as soon as they had a couple calls go against them and get their guys in foul trouble, they quit on the game. And
yeah,
that's not a great sign of the coach, but Washington clearly did not affect Washington. Zach Edey had 23 and 14. I think he had like 21 and 12 at halftime. He only played a couple minutes in the second half. The problem with this one, Joe, was that when Purdue's reserves came in, they kept scoring at the rate that they were. Obviously, Heidi, 10 points off the bench. Colvin, 9 points. Gillis, 6. Berg, 4. Waddell, 5. The Purdue bench players that don't get a lot of playing time still kind of took it to the Aggies.
Yeah. I have no further comment. 2 of my Final Four teams are out, both from the Mountain West. Last time I do that ever.
Yeah, Mountain West are, we talked about them getting underseeded. Well, the one team...
They might have deserved it.
The one team that got properly seeded is the only one that's left. So maybe they weren't as far off as we thought. Game 3, another blowout. James Madison, the Dukes, didn't really show up against the Blue Devils. Duke wins 93-55. Duke is making shots. Jared McCain, 30 points, 8 threes, and they made 14 threes. This is the Duke team that the expectations had at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, and to me, Sean, this had all the feel of a typical non-conference game at Cameroon Indoor. Yes, I know the crowd wasn't as pro-Duke as a Duke home game. However, this game was never close. We talked about this, Sean. We said James Madison could have hung around Duke. You more alluded to it than me. But yeah, once Duke got up to like a double-digit lead, I think James Madison probably felt the walls closing in and just got tighter and tighter. So Duke moves on to the Sweet 16. I think a lot of people criticized Duke all year for being soft. I don't know if that's necessarily solved by beating a 13 seed and a 12 seed, but they did get the luck of the draw. And I do want to still commend James Madison. I know Mark Byington does leave. Heck of a year, heck of an effort to defeat Wisconsin and really dominate them. And sadly, they couldn't have repeat performances.
Yeah, there's one thing that you can do if you are not physical and you can't go through teams. You can go around them or over them. And Duke shot over James Madison. Obviously not as physical as some of the other teams, but they punked Wisconsin. They could have punked Duke here too, but the Blue Devils made some shots, got things rolling, and I don't think they'll ever be not soft, but they didn't look soft in this one.
No, not at all. And for Duke getting to the Sweet 16 is not quite good enough. So, uh, game of the game of their season, probably the biggest game of John Shire's young Duke career on Friday night against Houston. I know you and Michael talk more about that tomorrow, but that has the makings of a pretty good game, Sean, and a really offensive game, hopefully.
Yeah, we're gonna find out real quick if they're soft against Houston because there's no team that plays harder than the Cougars. We'll get to it tomorrow, but the one game of the day, Joe, in Game 4 here, where the team wearing the colored road jersey won the game. That was Clemson, knocking off Baylor. The Tigers controlled the half, most of the second half. They did let Baylor back in it, and the Bears had 2 free throws to tie it with less than a minute left. But they pull away late, and a team that was playing pretty bad basketball coming into the big dance dismantles a New Mexico team that everybody thought would do well and dominated most of the game against 3-seeded Baylor. So Clemson is going to the Sweet 16.
Really good for Clemson. Team everyone doubted. Me and you certainly did, and probably most of the country did. I don't know why I said probably. Most of the country did. And for a team to be as stone cold as they were in February, to turn around like this, it could be one of these teams, Sean. We've seen teams like this in the past just limp into the tournament, and then all of a sudden that was probably what they needed. I don't know if that's necessarily what happened with Clemson. It might have just been their battle scars made them stronger. And certainly now, I mean, clearly now they're playing with house money. I think Arizona is going to be a force to be reckoned with for them, but Clemson at this stage has nothing to lose. So I think playing like that will do them nothing but good.
Unfortunately for Baylor, they pretty much lost in this game last year as a 3 seed to a 6 seed in the round of 32. Creighton last year, Clemson this year. Baylor comes up short again. Game 5, Joe. One of the, depends on how you thought this game went, ugliest, most fun, crazy basketball games that you could ever watch. Alabama 72, Grand Canyon 61. This was a total track meet with a lot of athletes. If you weren't very familiar with basketball, you might think that this was another sport. Grand Canyon did come back. They did take the lead late in the second half, but Alabama got them across the line. What a mess of a basketball game.
Yeah, I was talking about this game with a few people at work. This is not sustainable for Alabama. That was probably the biggest reason I picked them to lose to San Diego State last year with a far better team with far more talent. I'll put it this way, Sean. If this was against any other team that was not a 12 seed, they do not win this game playing like that.
They almost didn't.
And frankly, there were plenty of scenarios in this game where if one call or one shot didn't go their way, they'd probably lose. So I'm not going to be very overly positive about Alabama. I do think they're going to have a heroic effort to advance to the Final Four, which is what they've come pretty close to doing it at times, but they have a lot to figure out. I think it's good that they won, but they certainly have a lot to learn from in this game.
Grand Canyon had 5 assists on 18 buckets, and they were 2 of 20 from 3, and they were in the lead pretty late in the second half, which is, quite wild if you think about it. Alabama does like to play this up and down track meet style, and so does Grand Canyon, so they kind of just both did it, and there were a number of fouls, not giving the refs much choice. There are 27 total turnovers. We had, 60 some odd free throws. This was definitely one that there'll be no reason to go and watch back anytime soon. But it's the Crimson Tide that move on. Next game, Joe, another game featuring a Big Ten team, and it wasn't a close one. UConn takes care of Northwestern. This game only ends up being 17, but UConn was up 22 at the half, and it's a pretty sorry exit to what was a phenomenal career from Boo Buie.
Yeah, I think this game, we talked about this shot. I thought Northwestern had the potential to keep this close. They had to make shots to do so. They did not early, and Connecticut, being the force they are, took it to them. And by the probably 6-minute mark of the first half, Northwestern didn't quit, but come on, you're not coming back by down more than 15 to UConn. That's a death sentence, and it only got worse and worse. I don't think, like I said, Sean, this isn't even Northwestern talk. Northwestern had as good a season as I could imagine. I do think their goal later on, considering everything, I know they had injuries, they got to avoid these 1 seeds, man. That's been their exits in all 3 tournaments, because they ultimately do play really well. Chris Collins, I think, in March is a really underrated coach. Even his first year at Northwestern, upsetting Iowa in the Big Ten tournament, he gets his guys prepared in short periods of time. Unfortunately, in this case, Connecticut is the best team in the country. So I think Northwestern has a lot to figure out this offseason. We'll get into that later. But I think overall a really good season for the Cats. And they just ran into the Huskies. And I think it is as simple as that, truthfully.
Yeah, I think they did well to win the first game, to be honest. FAU was more talent and a better team than them. They were able to get by them. And, Boo Buie probably could have played better. He was 2 for 15 from the field. But, there was no way that UConn was losing this game the way that they're playing. It looks, certainly at this point, Joe, that we are headed for a UConn-Purdue championship game because no teams look like that they can be close to either one of those teams. And neither team has lost a game that was not in an away game on another team's campus all year. None of those left, if you're wondering. So we'll see what happens there. Games, we'll go to Game 8 first because Game 7 actually ended later yesterday and was far more interesting. But Game 8, San Diego State and Yale, the Aztecs win big. Cinderellas in this tournament have not sustained their performances with another good round after a good previous round. And it's more of the same here. Yale never in this game. The Aztecs had too much size. Jadon Ledee, 26 points. And Brian Dutcher and his team look like that they could do some damage in this tournament again.
Sean, I think San Diego State got lucky with their draws. They were lucky to get past UAB. And Yale, I understand what James Jones said. James Jones was not correct on this day. So Aztecs move on. I think Brian Dutcher, just one general storyline I should add on. A lot of people were giving Mark Few his flowers on Saturday, and rightfully so. I hope Dutcher does get his flowers. He's got the Aztec program to be really good. People should also remember 2019, 2020. They would have been a 1 or 2 seed. So probably a top 15 program in the country by now, Sean, and you could argue top 10. Certainly since 2019, I'd say they're a top 10 program. So
and they've had a number of great players.
Yeah, really good on the Aztecs. And Yale, certainly similar to Oakland, very remarkable run. Yale was probably one of the luckiest teams, just based on what they did in the Ivy League. I do think Princeton was the best team in the Ivy League this season. They just had their worst performance of the year against Brown. And a sub-500 Brown really could have been playing in this tournament, Sean.
Yeah, Brown had that game, by the way.
Yeah.
If they make their free throws and don't turn it over, they're a 16 seed play. And Yale's a pretty good team in the top 100 in Ken Pom. They always play well in the non-conference. They always play like some power conference teams on the road and lose by 10 and never really be in the game, and that just really boosts their numbers. But they actually ended up stealing one against Auburn. Yale, they have a lot of graduating players, and you know how hard it is to get transfers into the Ivy League. It's impossible. So I think we might see some regression from the Bulldogs this year. It was a wildly up and down season. They started off pretty tough with a tough schedule, and they did lose a home game to my Fairfield Stags. But Poulikitis, his 28-point performance was kind of out of the ordinary, and he regresses to the mean here. And Fortunately, the Aztecs won this game really quick. Not great for your entertainment, but great for the Aztecs as they were able to get some players some rest. Now, the last game of the day, Joe, went to overtime. It was a rematch from earlier in this year. It's Houston that wins 100-95. Texas A&M hits a fall-away 3 at the buzzer to send it to overtime. 4 of the 5 Houston starters foul out. This was a wild one if the listeners happened to stay up. If you didn't, you missed it.
Frankly, Sean, I missed it because I thought Houston had this one, and then watching the replay this morning, it's another one of these teams. You know what I'm going to say, Sean? That's your mulligan. That's not going to happen again for Houston. I certainly hope they learned a valuable lesson, and I'm not going to target the Texas A&M play everyone's going to talk about. Sean, this, to me, just had no defense in this game. I'm going to be truthful with you. 3 of Houston starters, 20 points or above, and really not much else to say regarding this, Sean. I think, yeah, I think your synopsis, Sean, as much as I don't want to admit it, that Purdue and UConn might be the 2 teams on a collision course, it might serve correct. Clearly, Vegas doesn't feel as good about Houston as they once did. The 4.5 against Duke. I don't know, Sean. Houston has a lot to figure out in practice this week. What's not called into question is their effort and their tenacity on the floor. That could only take you so far sometimes. I really hope they learned their lesson just for Houston's sake. It's I'm not impressed. That's all I'll say.
Yeah,
I wasn't
either.
Water.
This was their worst defensive game of the year per Bart Torvik's possession rankings. 120.6 points per possession, or points per 100 possessions. 86 points in 40 minutes against Houston. That's, Texas A&M missed a golden opportunity here to take it. And Houston, I'm going to commend their bench players for getting them across the line, Joe. These players do not play a lot of minutes, but Wilson, Dunn, Walker, and Lath, if you're a college basketball fan like me, I've only heard of 1 or 2 of those players before yesterday, and they came on with the season on the line with their starters fouled out, and they got the job done. They do deserve some credit there. Kelvin Sampson, obviously, I would not be shocked at all if they smothered Duke on 3 days prep in a couple days before they're able to watch the film on this one and move on. But this was a crazy basketball game, and the first one kind of was too. It was 70-66. Houston won. And Texas A&M just kept making crazy shots to stay in it. This was kind of the same thing, just a couple more points, and obviously it ended up going to overtime. But, Joe, that's all of the games from Sunday. And that's our round of 32 recap. We're down to 16 teams. A lot of, the 1, 2, all the ones in, all the 2 seeds make it, and just 1 double-digit seed, so the under hit for that one. First time in years that's happened. But that's all we have for you today. Be sure to check out our other content, and we'll see you tomorrow. Kumar and I will be on for a Sweet 16 preview.